welcome back to my channel. My name is Kelsey and today I'm here to give you some recommendations for the end of the year. So because we are slowly approaching December, maybe you're a little behind on your Goodreads goal, maybe you just need some shorter books to really hit. I've come up with a list of 10 short books that I absolutely love, that I absolutely recommend, and I think you can probably get to by the end of the year. So let's start off with some classics. I definitely recommend reading We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This is a pretty classic gothic tale about this sort of peculiar girl named Merit Cat and her really weird family that does not leave their house. A sort of struggle ensues when a distant cousin comes over and sort of disrupts the family dynamic in the home. I really love this. It was my first introduction to Shirley Jackson and I definitely want to pick up more from her. Something I really enjoy in horror books is when there is this slow, unnerving energy, and that's definitely present within this book. It's about the shunning of a family and the shunning of a house, but I would also argue it's a kind of pushback against the patriarchy, and I just absolutely loved that. I love that it was slow. I love that it had a lot of different themes and lenses that you could read from. Coming in at a total of 196 pages, I definitely think that this is a classic horror that you can read before the end of the year. The next classic I have is one of my absolute favorites. It's Animal Farm by George Orwell. This is essentially about a farm that is taken over by its overworked animals, and as these animals sort of bond together in order to create this perfect utopia paradise filled with justice and equalities amongst all the animals, they sort of move through becoming a revolution into a tyranny. I think Orwell does a really great job at getting his message across and his themes across in his discussions about authoritarianism and communism and what's going on at the time that this was written, and essentially saying what he needs to say in such a few amount of pages. I definitely think it's probably worth reading it, especially in the unfortunate political climate that we are currently existing in right now. I love how it's an allegorical look at the Russian Revolution and just how telling it is about the nature of man through the lenses of these different farm animals. It's a classic for a reason, and coming in at 141 pages, this is another one that I think you can check off your list for the year. Next, we have one of my favorite sci-fi dystopian classics that I personally think is severely underrated, and that is The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. This takes place in a world that's sort of paralyzed by genetic mutations in their children. The setting is this sort of rural community in what we think is the past, and if a child is born with what they refer to as a deviation in the genes, then they are sort of rooted out, sent away, or destroyed because they are considered offenses and abominations. And the story surrounds this group of children that do not have these visible deviations. In this one, Wyndham perfectly wraps a story of conformity and ethic struggles in this strange and what seems like apocalyptic world, not too far from our future, not to get back into the state of our world. His prose is absolutely fantastic. I read this when I was 15, 16. I've reread it since then, but it has remained so impactful to me because of the prose, because of the strength of the story and the themes and the characters. It's definitely a product of its time, but if you are comfortable reading older classics that try to talk about religious conformity and being different, I highly recommend this one, coming in at 200 pages. Sticking with sci-fi, which is arguably one of my favorite genres, we'll tackle two more modern ones. The first one I would highly suggest is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Annihilation is probably one of my favorite sci-fi books of all time. It takes place in this secluded area referred to as Area X, and it has been cut off from the rest of the world for decades. Nature has really reclaimed this space, and humans tried to send in different expeditions into Area X in order to discover why it became what it is. Could we re-enter it? Could we as humans reclaim this space? And 10 expeditions have gone and failed with that task. So Annihilation follows the 11th expedition sent into Area X. This novel is really epistolary focus, and I think if you like that, you will really enjoy this book. It's written in a journal format, which I absolutely loved. I love following this cryptic sense of consciousness. You don't really know what's going on. You don't know what's real. You don't know if the characters in the novel are being affected by the area around them. It really enveloped me. I read this book in 1 or 2 sittings, and I still to this day contemplate about what I read read about. I really enjoy Jeff Vandermeer's writing, and I think if you enjoy this more beautiful / scientific writing style, you'll really enjoy this one. And coming in at only 195 pages, I definitely think this is one you can tackle this year. The fifth book I'm going to recommend to you, and another science fiction novel, is A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I love Becky Chambers, so it was really difficult for me to narrow down like one book and one of her shorter books that I wanted to encompass my overall feelings about her writing. And A Psalm for the Wild Built does that. It follows a world where centuries before, the robots of this planet gained self-awareness and decided that they no longer wanted to help humans and moved into the forest, where they've sort of settled away from civilization, until one day a tea monk stumbles upon a robot, and the robot asks the tea monk, what do humans need? The only way that they will go back into the forest is if they can answer this question. This was one of the first books I read in 2024, this year, and it has still left a lasting impact on me. I think I read it probably at just the right time. It's a perfect like little book that looks at our purpose in the world, who we are, how we relate to nature, how we relate to civilization, how we relate to society in general. Much like our characters in this book, I was searching for warmth, searching for meaning in life, and reading this felt like I was drinking that warm cup of tea. This comes in at a total of 151 pages, and I definitely, if I need to pick one out of all of these books to read, recommend this one. The next book, I'm not much of a romance reader, but this was definitely one that shook me, surprised me. I absolutely loved it. It is a novella. It is in the middle of a series, but it's not that bad. You can definitely read it on its own. I did. And it is Once Ghosted, Twice Shy by Alyssa Cole. This is a novella that takes place in her Reluctant Royal series, but is separate from the like royal characters, and follows the bodyguard of one of the princes. And her name is Lakotsi, and she is having her own love affair in New York City. And of course, as she's looking for love, as she's on these dating apps and not really doing well, who does she run into but one of her exes, Fabiola. Fabiola, meeting Lakotsi one more time on the subway haphazardly, asks her to just give her one more chance and go out for coffee. And despite being the one that's dumped, Lakotsi reluctantly agrees, and we have this sort of beautiful little romance form. This made me really enjoy romance. It made me really enjoy Alyssa Cole. I would highly recommend any of her books, but this is one of her shorter ones. It made me realize that romance could be fun to read. It made me realize also that I love the second chance romance. So if you like a second chance romance or a bodyguard romance, I would highly recommend this one. And it's so short, it's 101 pages. I don't want to spoil any more than I need, but Alyssa Cole is a brilliant romance writer. And if you have to read a short romance before the end of the year, might suggest this one. Coming in at number 7, here's a little fantasy for you. I would recommend any of the books in this series, but my particular favorite in the Wayward Children series is Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Sean McGuire. As mentioned, this is the second installment in the Wayward Children series, which is a series of books that follows children who come out of different fairy tales, different stories, their own worlds, if you will. And this particular installment follows Jack and Jill, who were 12 when they walked down a impossible staircase and found this land filled with mad scientists and vampires and death and choices, which is something the two siblings felt like they never really got a chance to decide for themselves. Personally, I feel like I enjoy the series overall, but I found this one to have the most depth out of all of the ones I've read so far. There's a discussion on feminism, parenting, gender roles, and so many more themes that just shape the overall plot of the novel in so few pages. I was astounded. I was definitely really impressed with Sean McGuire when I read this one. Again, you could read any which one that intrigues you in this series because they are all within novella length and they all follow individual worlds and one overall plot. But if you want to just read one, I would highly recommend this one, and coming in at 187 pages, it's really easy to knock out. And now I just wanted to throw in some Canadian fiction books because I've been feeling very nostalgic for my English degree and I want to support some Can Lit, and a lot of my favorite shorter books are Canadian literature. So the first one is The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Demeline. I absolutely love this book. Constantly to this day, still think about this book from when I read it. Sherry Demeline quickly became an autobi author for me as well after I read The Marrow Thieves. But basically this is a book that takes place in a futuristic society after global warming has sort of ruined the world. And people have lost the ability to dream. The only people that are still able to dream are North America's indigenous peoples. And it is in their marrow that they can find the cure for the rest of the world. So getting the marrow and getting thus the cure for not dreaming comes at the cost of those who are still able to do so. And the novel follows a character who is on the run from these hunts, struggling to survive. So this is probably one of the more beautiful books that I've read in a really, really, really long time. Again, we're looking at political discussions of what's currently going on in society. And because of that, it's so much more than just a simple dystopian fiction book. It's an Indigenous narrative that looks at the loss of a culture and people and the need to keep both of those things alive. It's a really powerful book, but painful at the same time, that's really there to offer a teaching to its readers. The ending is a very real ending, so take from that what you will, but it was amazing and I can't recommend it enough. I have the sequel actually on my TBR, and that's a book that I really need to get to. But coming in at 234 pages, probably the longest one I've recommended so far. It's one that I absolutely highly recommend. Our penultimate, our second to last book is Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. This is another Canadian Indigenous own voices novel that follows Johnny Appleseed, who is a young two-spirit indigiqueer and is sort of working as like, not a memoir, but very similar to what Joshua Whitehead has experienced in his life. The character of Johnny is off of the reserves and trying to make it in the big city, but has to come back to the reserve to attend the funeral of his stepfather, and what ensues in this book is the 7 days that he's on the reservation, reconnecting with his home and his Indigenous identity. I read this for school and I really enjoyed it because I feel like it brings forth a narrative that I personally have never read before, and I would highly recommend others to read it if you've never read a two-spirited or indigiqueer novel. I really enjoyed Johnny as a main character, even though he doesn't live this like glamorous lifestyle. It feels very raw and very true to real life as to what people can experience in these bigger cities. And I really enjoyed following Johnny as he comes to terms with who he is and questions different moments in his life and different aspects that he's experienced. His story really contains moments of like violence and sex and drug use, and this evokes the strength that Johnny has as a character and what Joshua Whitehead is really doing to emphasize that. The novel does really read as a collection of thoughts rather than a sort of cohesive narrative, but I think it really works for the story that Joshua Whitehead is telling. And if you want to experience a really interesting and different book, I highly recommend this at 224 pages. And the last book I would really like to recommend is Brother by David Chariandi. This is another book that's sort of a like fictional reflective memoir. The word you are referring to, Kelsey, is autofiction or metafiction. These books fall under that sort of category, which tells the story of two brothers in a Scarborough, Ontario suburb as they deal with this underlying and simmering violence in the summer of 1991. I won't go too much into detail just because this is a really sad and harrowing story about a Trinidadian family immigrating to Canada and really dealing with police brutality. From page 1, this story will really grip you. Chariandi carefully weaves together this story of loss with beautiful prose that really just pulls at your heartstrings for the entirety of the novel. I wish I had so much more time with the brothers' community, with their parents, but Chariandi really did a great job at looking into this story of family and immigration. It's a very beautiful novel. I highly recommend it, and coming in at 192 pages, I really don't think there's any excuse not to pick it up before the end of the year. So that's it. Those are all of the books I recommend that are short that you can definitely get to by the end of the year. If you have any short book recommendations, please let me know down below. I would love to get some more because I would love to just read in abundance. If you would like to follow me on my reading journey, I always leave a link down below to my Twitter, Goodreads, and Instagram if you would like to follow me there. And of course, because it is the end of the video, please do not forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. It does wonders for my channel, makes me feel really good. And that's it. I never know how to end these things, so I will see you next time. Okay, bye!